And it's just a hardship on the small business person. And we're going to see it in the increase in products, because if the delivery people are charging more, getting charged, they're going to pass the charge on to us. And so there's something else that probably could be done.
I think you raised some very interesting points. First is I think for the entire panel is, what is the cost of congestion? One of the byproducts of congestion, we believe, is the air emissions that look as if they contribute to asthma. I think another one is the fact that you identified that there's no clear way to quickly essentially do a regional commute or travel regionally as you do today. There is clearly a cost attached with the delay, the time that you spend in your car, that you could be actually serving clients.
Productive.
Obviously, technology helps with things like cell phones or Blackberries.
Joe, I have no question in my mind at all about the fact that this is simply a tax, and the primary intent is to raise revenue. I very strongly disagree with this proposal because it imposes the tax on New York City residents. Why would you support that? A commuter tax on New York City residents when we already pay all of the taxes as residents in the city, and instead of trying to have this commuter tax imposed on only people coming in who I think congest our streets.
I think that's a very good point. I think for many years there was a commuter tax that focused on people from the surrounding suburbs who came into New York City, who used New York City's services, who placed demands on New York City's infrastructure. Unfortunately, that commuter tax is no longer in place. I do think that there are certain merits to that general concept. The one other thing that I think is worth mentioning in terms of congestion pricing and driving in New York City is that of the commuters in New York, the commuter base, 5% of those who work in New York actually drive to work each day. And of those 5% of the total working population of New York, about 83% of those, according to a study that's been done by the New York City Partnership, do have other options in terms of mass transit.
Dr. Fulcocchio, do you know of data that supports that?
There are a lot of perspectives you can use, in discussing traffic congestion. Obviously, what I would start out of in terms of providing some clarity in this question is, I would start from the transportation standpoint. The health effects are associated with it, but just from the transportation standpoint, if we had the conditions in New York City where traffic was at a standstill because nobody could move, completely gridlock, right? Nobody would question that we have to do something about that because it impacts the productivity of businesses and social activities that go on. Now, New York City, we're talking about Manhattan, is the heaviest and most intensely developed piece of land in the country. So you expect congestion to be part of that environment, right? So it's just a question in my mind is, at what point does congestion start interfering with productivity? And you have to be able to identify that point. Are we there now? Is that the point that is critical? Is that a compelling reason right now to do a drastic implementation of a congestion charge, which is very successful in raising revenues because we've seen the numbers? But it's doubtful in my mind that, in fact, it has an impact on congestion, to the point that we are talking about, to the point that London has been experiencing. London has had a charge of $8, or equivalent to it. It has doubled it now to it's about 16. And it had no charges before. There had no tolls to pay at that point. So there was no MTA, bridge and tunnel toll charged to the London travelers. And here we are deducting that. If anything, if you want to have the same impact that London is experiencing, maybe we should put it on top of that. So people will react to it. That's a personal observation in terms of just the relationship, since we are talking about London and other places. But the question is, I think in order to move forward with this concept of congestion pricing, and maybe even getting your view to change, we got to be able to show that the network productivity of the system right now is diminished because of the congestion, that we are not achieving what we could. We're not getting out of the network what it's supposed to provide in terms of mobility and productive usage. And we should measure that. So if we are beyond that point, say, hey, we should be at a certain level of productivity. We are now 50% of what we are. We have to do something. We have to do something about congestion. And at that point, then you start thinking of using technology to enforce violations that go on right now. You know, people, you know, when you talk about congestion, in the morning, from 6 to about 9 o'clock in the morning, traffic is flowing very well in Manhattan. It comes in, goes into the garages, and relatively speaking, you don't have that kind of, you know, effect that you say, hey, we have to do something.
So
if you go in the middle of the day, between say 10 and whatever, 4 o'clock, or maybe 7 or pardon me, or 6, that's where congestion starts picking up because people start abusing the street space. People have to load and unload on the moving lane. People are waiting for a client to come out. There are the black cars, and so on. So all of these activities reduce the capacity of the street system.
So you're saying that the congestion is not necessarily caused by the volume of traffic that goes in and through Manhattan, but by the activities of commerce,
both,
which the tax would not impact on significantly because most of those people who would pay the tax could charge that as a business expense.
I don't go to that conclusion because I haven't really thought about this. I haven't measured, but I can see that the problem of congestion is the result of two interacting variables, volume and capacity. And you look at the capacity in the morning, where everything is clear, nobody's delivering really to the extent that they do in the middle of the day, and people are commuters, they go right into the garages. Madison Avenue works very well around 9 o'clock in the morning. Traffic is just as fast as it could be, considering the conditions. It's when it starts building up in the middle of the day. Pedestrians go to lunch, and then the taxis are all over the place. And that's another question that I thought maybe the plan that the mayor is advocating of eliminating taxis from the surcharge may be a bit arbitrary in that sense, because taxis contribute to congestion like everybody else contributes to congestion. And if you're arguing that private vehicles coming into Manhattan should use mass transit, I would argue that people who use taxis should use buses and transit. And they should be should pay more for the privilege of using taxis, including the cost of congestion. Because basically taxis, the yellow taxis, they impact the congestion by quite a large amount. About 40% or so of their miles are empty miles. They're looking for passengers. So that's congestion. And then the use of the streets, how the curb parking is used, yes. And all sorts of alternatives, all sorts of arcane rules that exist there, all sorts of permits that people have and privileges. Whoever they are, if they are employees of a public agency, they have a permit to park anywhere they want.